So, with update 95.5, there have been a few changes to the existing perk decks, mostly small buffs here and there. Today I'm mostly just going to cover the changes to Hitman, so if you're interested in the others, I'll give a quick summary at the end about what I think of them so far. Anyway, about Hitman, it got a few buffs. Namely, it got rid of all of the armor penalties that it once had, so that's pretty nice. And it was also given a skill that forces your armor to recover 5 seconds after being broken, no matter what the situation. And that's that right here. And I also believe that for the Akimbo part of this skill, or this perk deck, they also gave it more stability and more ammo, just like acing the Akimbo skill in Fugitive would do. So, I don't actually know if that was already there prior to the update. I can't really remember, so don't quote me on that. Well, anyway, I guess the thing most people care about is it good now? And I would say, To me, Hitman always felt like a perk deck that was meant to be in 2 other perk decks instead. The armor portion felt like it should have been an Infiltrator, or Sociopath or something. And the Akimbo part, I always thought it would be a wonderful addition to Crook, since Crook is generally outshined by Rogue's copious amounts of dodge, and the super fast weapon swap. It always felt like an awkward deck, since having Akimbo weapons meant generally you invested into Mastermind quite a bit, and most people that invest into Mastermind tend to gravitate toward dodge builds. But since you're not getting extra dodge from that perk deck, that must mean it's more geared towards armor use. But even then, the armor bonuses you get were pretty marginal, and as always, a lot of the other perk decks just did the job that much better. So to answer the earlier question, is Hitman good now? I would say that it's still very subpar. I never quite put much thought into trying to make a decent Hitman setup, so I figured I would use this opportunity to try and create a build that would make Hitman at least somewhat usable since it's been buffed a little bit. For this video, I decided to go with a Mastermind Enforcer setup, which to me is the only setup I could think of that would warrant Hitman being a desirable perk deck. I'll put a link to the build in the description somewhere, and basically the only reason why I would ever want to use Hitman is when I want to use Akimbo weapons, and if I feel like using armor instead, because dodge is letting me down, which actually happens quite a bit. So for the Akimbos, pistol skills and Mastermind. For the armor, ICTV and Enforcer. Although seeing people use Hitman is actually pretty rare, it's not rare at all to see people run Mastermind Enforcer setups for decent armor and having Inspire on the higher difficulties. I gave the Master Forcer Hitman setup a few goes, and it's not too terrible. Most of the Akimbo weapons now can hold their own compared to most assault rifles. I mean, the Bernetti 9s and the Shimano 88s, they have overall better stats than things like the JP36, the FAMAS, or the Commando 553, at least in terms of damage and accuracy. And the only thing that those assault rifles have better than the Akimbos is a larger ammo pool. But the Akimbos have the added benefit of having things like the extended mags available, which gives them a magazine of like 50 plus rounds. The Crosskill, Interceptor, Shimano Custom Akimbos, they're basically on par with things like the Scar and the Falcon in terms of their stats. But in my eyes, they're pretty much better because they're able to carry more ammo than those assault rifles, with the Akimbos being able to carry 150 rounds, while those assault rifles can only carry 125. With fully loaded basic, that is. And then there's the Akimbo Deagles, which are monsters in their own right. They don't have that much ammo, but goddamn they pack a fucking punch like none other, with decent accuracy to boot, so really reminiscent of the M308 or DMR kit assault rifles. Still, point is, Akimbos are very decent weapons to use, and they've definitely got an added cool factor to them, at least in my book. So, if you're the type of person to go Master Forcer and pick up pistol skills, and you just got a hankering for using the Akimbos, Hitman might not be such a bad idea. As for the rest of Hitman, I'll give you a quick refresher as to what the perk deck offers for survivability. I've already told you that it gives you ambidexterity, the ability to use Akimbo weapons with a -16 stability penalty, and a 25% ammo increase. It also gives you 45% faster armor recovery rate, and the new addition, which is guaranteed armor recovery after 5 seconds of your armor breaking, regardless of the situation. So the faster armor recovery rate is pretty fast. As a Master Forcer that is using ICTV without Bulletproof from Technician, the armor regen is pretty noticeable, so you can almost think of it as having the Ace version of Bulletproof without actually going to Tech at all. Of course, you also wouldn't be getting the extra armor from Bulletproof, which is arguably more useful, but with that kind of skill build, you'll generally take what you can get. At first, I thought the 5-second guaranteed armor regen would be more useful than it is, but it's actually not that noticeable. On Death Wish, when you start taking health damage, you better find cover fast, or you're just going to end up dying. And a 5-second guaranteed regen won't help, because it won't take nearly that long for all your health to go bye-bye. This would be pretty useful if you didn't die so fast, or if there weren't so many things that instantly kill you in this game. Still, a forced armor regen is handy if you manage to take minimal damage after your armor is broken, but for some reason you kept getting chip shot by the cops, so your armor never starts recovering. It's definitely one of those things that you wouldn't notice unless you were explicitly paying attention to it though. I thought about trying to pair that force regeneration with Bullseye from Fugitive, which is a skill that regenerates a small amount of armor per headshot that you score, with a cooldown of 2 seconds. But I kinda realized that getting Bullseye would be ridiculous, since if I were to go that high into the Fugitive tree, I should have just invested a few more points to get the Akimbo skill, and just utilized a whole different perk deck altogether. I would say that the survivability aspects of the perk deck are pretty underwhelming, especially when considering you could pick up a perk deck like Muscle, which gives you a massive health reserve pool, on top of passive health regen and Panic. Maybe Muscle's a bad example to compare it to, since it's kinda hard to compare any perk deck to the sheer effectiveness of Muscle. But that's another thing I wanted to talk about. Perk decks without some form of health regeneration are probably used way less than any perk deck with health regeneration. Having health regen is immensely helpful since it usually replaces the need for first aid kits, meaning more open setups utilizing other skill builds. And these days, so many of the perk decks have some form of health regen. Hitman, of course, falls into the category of no health regen, and in turn is probably a step down from any of the other perk decks as it is, disregarding any other aspect of it. So, after giving the new Hitman perk deck a bit more of a serious look, and giving it some tries with other setups as well, I definitely found the most use out of a Master Forcer setup. While it may not be completely useless, as some people would have you believe, it's definitely outshined by other perk decks. Though saying it's the only one that's outshined would be lying, since many of them currently hide in the shadows of perk decks like Muscle. Still, if you want to have some easy Akimbo weapons, and you don't mind a setup that's kinda similar to this, I can see you making things work. Far too situational for my tastes, and normally I prefer a dodge setup with my Akimbos anyway, since they have good concealment, which just pairs well with any sneaky bastard builds being made. I guess for me the biggest problem with Hitman is it's a perk deck that gears itself towards pistols and armor, two things that don't really mesh together so well, simply because of the setups you're required to make. In summary, while the buffs for Hitman were nice, I still don't think I really have a build where I'll ever really use Hitman. As far as I can tell, the only desirable thing about Hitman is just getting Akimbos if you really wanted that, and you aren't willing to invest points into Fugitive. Otherwise, I'd say it's more effort than it's worth. Well, that's all I gotta say about Hitman. So what's up with the other perk decks? I'm not going to be going too much into specifics, but this is just going to be how I feel about their changes. Crew Chief got some extra damage resistance, so that's nice for anyone that likes to run a team-oriented perk deck. And it's even got a little bit of a selfish aspect by giving the user more damage resistance when they're at low health. Armor got a skill that gives you the ability to take no health damage for 1.5 seconds once your armor is completely depleted, and this can't happen more than once every 15 seconds. It's a nice addition to the perk deck, and I thought it would be better than it is. Gives you a little bit more leeway when you got too much shit on you or when you're fighting a bulldozer or something. But for me, I can never really get it to work when I want it to, since when you play on Death Wish, your armor is constantly being broken anyway. So it's a nice fallback, but I can't say it's something that you can really rely on. Burglar got a skill that increases your crouch movement speed, which falls nicely in line for anybody that likes to sneak around. Don't know why that was a necessary addition, but I mean, I can't really complain. Gambler also got a small little change. Your healing from ammo packs off the ground will be 100% more effective if you have lower health than someone on your team. And apparently that affects stacks for every teammate that has higher health than you. That's actually a pretty nice change. I always did think Gambler was one of the more interesting perk decks, though it is a little bit difficult to run since your survivability is reliant solely on health regeneration since you don't have any damage resistances or anything. Not only that, but your method of health regen is not exactly the most reliable or consistent source. So for me, after trying these out a little bit, the changes aren't massive, but they're definitely nice to have. I think I enjoyed Gambler's changes the most, and everything else was a welcome addition to lesser used perk decks. Whether or not these changes made these perk decks more desirable when we have shit like Muscle or Grinder, probably the two kings of the perk decks, well, that's really up for you to decide. I mostly find myself using different perk decks just for switching things up, since some of them are quite fun to mess around with. But if we're talking about using them regularly on Death Wish, that's a different story.